Are you ready to unlock hidden savings within your organization's Microsoft 365 subscriptions? Introducing Tenant Detective, an application designed to analyze your Microsoft 365 usage data and uncover cost-saving opportunities without impacting your users. Picture this: your organization invests in Microsoft 365 subscriptions, but are you truly maximizing its value? With Tenant Detective's proprietary set of algorithms, you can now gain unprecedented insights into your Microsoft 365 usage. Imagine receiving a detailed usage analytics report tailored specifically to your organization. Discover how much you can save by eliminating unused licenses and rationalizing subscriptions for over-licensed users. With Tenant Detective, you can rest assured knowing that your organization's Microsoft 365 investment is being put to its best use. Say goodbye to overspending on licenses that sit idle and hello to a more cost-efficient future. Visit tenantdetective.plow.net today to start optimizing your subscriptions.
Hey, Cut the Shit listeners. You can find every episode on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Go check us out.
Welcome back, everybody. You're listening to Cut the Shit, a podcast series that aims to take a closer look at the impact of the IT industry, both the good and the bad. Cut the Shit is brought to you by Plow Networks, a managed IT services company based just outside Nashville, Tennessee. I'm Bryan Link, COO here at Plow, and I'll be your host for this series. I'll ask questions, and with the help of our guests, try to dig deep on some of the key challenges we all face dealing with IT. So with that, let's cut the shit and get started. On today's episode, I'm very excited to have Carlos Guerrero as our guest. For the past 3 years, Carlos has served as Senior Account Executive at 360 Advanced, a 20-year-old leading cybersecurity audit and compliance firm based near St. Petersburg, Florida. Before that, Carlos spent almost 7 years running business development for a traditional MSP, so he's been in the IT game for a while now. During our conversation, I get Carlos to talk about the changing nature of compliance and how companies are dealing with it, what makes for a good outsourced compliance relationship, and what he expects when it comes to the regulatory apparatus's ability to keep up with emerging technologies. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Carlos Guerrero.
Carlos, welcome to Cut the Shit. How are you today?
How you doing, man? I'm doing all right. Good to be here.
Very good. Where do we find you today? Are you in Florida? Is that correct?
I am. I'm in the Tampa, Florida area, in the here above St. Pete, kind of near Tampa, but in the general vicinity.
Gotcha. Is it warming up? Is it getting nice, I would assume?
It's starting to get hot. It will. I mean, and it's raining today, so it'll start getting humid here soon. But right now, like when I'm walking outside, I think to myself, man, this is why people move to Florida. This is why we're in Florida. And so it's been real nice last couple weeks.
Good deal. Before we kind of dive in, I mean, we got a lot to talk about, so I don't want to take up too much time on the front end stuff. But before we dive in, I always like to kind of get us started a little bit with a random question. Can you give us an example of a technology you've used lately or a hack that you've seen that you think others ought to know about? Just something interesting that you've seen in terms of a technology use. It could be at work, it could be at home, could be a friend, a kid, it could be anything like that.
Technology use that I think's been interesting or maybe kind of maybe changing the landscape a little bit or
something.
I
mean, it doesn't have to be seismic necessarily. I mean, it could be just something interesting, you know.
I think this is a pretty straightforward answer, and it's not revolutionary by any means, but I think that what I'm continually fascinated by is the ability for us to have conversations like this, and for me to create a bit of enter the marketplace in a way that I've never could have before, even a couple of years ago. And that just that seems to continue to reinforce itself. And I think people are just getting more and more used to that. And I think, having podcasts like yours and different ways for people to share and express themselves, I guess it's just the continuation of leveraging these technologies. If you want to think about the positive things, right, as a, democratization of thought, and I'm continue amazed to see how that keeps moving on and how we keep taking advantage of that.
Yeah, I mean the lowering of the barrier to entry to do. forget about video conferencing, what we're doing right now over the internet, because it's pretty amazing if you think about it. We've taken it for granted now, but it's pretty wild.
Yep.
I'm old enough to remember this would have been something on a Jetsons episode, right? Not a real, not a real thing. And here we are.
Yep.
But the barrier to entry to your point, self-expression around whether that's artistic or marketing or business or whatever, it's amazing. I mean, it's access to tools and capabilities that we could have only dreamed about, right? There were only major companies could have done this even 20 years ago.
Yeah.
It's pretty wild. But to your point, we bake it in so quick, we kind of forget about it. It just, now it's just normal, right?
It's fascinating, and we're probably, similar ages, or certainly we're around when, there was that shift from analog to digital, and there was just a lot of crazy stuff happening in that area, and to kind of see how things have gone from there. I'll provide a kind of a quick anecdote. So, I'm in sales, and I have a friend who's probably 10 years older than me in sales, and she's been at this MSSP for 15 years. She started her career there, and she's been, really, really successful. I was like, man, when I was her age, and I thought when I was her age, the MSSPs weren't even a thing, right? There was, technology was still getting stood up in a really kind of rudimentary way. And it's just amazing to think about how that's really just changed the way we, go to market and how we create our lives and all these things. I'm just fascinated by it.
For sure. All right. Well, let's kind of get into it. Well, we sort of already have, but let's keep moving. To get us started, how about give us kind of a quick thumbnail sketch on your background? You've got an interesting resume.
Yeah.
So maybe just kind of give us, kind of walk us through your journey to where you are today, and then we could talk some about your company on the backside of that.
I appreciate that. So I always start by telling people that I have 2 art degrees, and I kind of, share that, after high school, I went and got my bachelor's of fine arts, and then I spent a couple years going to artist residencies and traveling the country, really. And then I ended up in Lincoln, Nebraska for graduate school, and that's where I got my master's degree in fine arts. And I did painting and sculpture and drawing and all sorts of expressive things. And so after grad school, I was I was looking for work, and what that meant was I was looking to be like a college professor, and through that I was also hoping to be an artist as well. And I started working at this nonprofit art center, and at that nonprofit art center I started helping them raise money, and it just clicked at one point. It's like, wow, this is pretty incredible. I found myself in boardrooms and that sort of thing. And then so that just kind of transitioned, believe it or not, into business development. So I started working with some guys who had started a tech company that didn't work out. But from there, I started working at an MSP in Lincoln, Nebraska, and then moved to Florida here to help them, build out their business here. And then now I'm working at 360 Advanced. And so I guess if there's any common thread to any of that, and I think this kind of ties into cyber and technology too, is that there's this desire that I've always had to create and build and kind of make things where things weren't before. And that just turned itself into business. And I think that fits really, really well, frankly, into the tech and cyber and compliance space.
Yeah, I was a political science and French major who now works in technology. So, I don't expect everybody to have a down the middle. My wife's an accountant. She went to college, got an accounting degree, and became an accountant. Right? That's a normal. That happens too. So it's it takes all kinds. But I do think that sort of broader perspective can lead you in some interesting directions, as your path certainly points out. So tell us a little bit about 360 Advanced, what the company is about, and we'll kind of dig in a little bit there.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much for that opportunity. So 360 Advanced, we are a cybersecurity audit and compliance firm based here in the Tampa area. We're about 115 or so employees now, and the folks who started the business are still running the business. And so I like to think of us as a real boutique shop, and I think of it all in all the best kind of ways, right? We're big enough to have plenty of resources, but we still have to operate in a way where we are really paying attention to client outcomes, and that's really at the core of the sort of culture here. And I guess the services we offer, real quick, are all the ones you think we would, like the SOC 2, ISO 27001, PCI, high trust. We're going to be a FedRAMP assessor. We do pen testing and some professional services around all that. But the real kind of cool thing about it is we're building the business here, and I get to be a part of that. And in an industry that is just developing right in front of our eyes, I think.
So how old is the company? And you mentioned the founders are still kind of involved.
Yeah, 20 years.
Were they accountants who then spun out into this sort of tell me about
Yes.
the sort of the origin story.
No, it's great. Yeah. So, yes, Dan and Danielle, they started with a couple other guys, started the business 20 years ago, and they spun out of an accounting background, and they decided at that time, which was a little different, right, that we're just going to focus on IT audits. And I think it was SAS 70 at that time, and then just rode the wave as that turned into SOC 2 and then all the other things. And now, I mean, geez, man, the compliance space is just as important or more important than ever. And I mean, I'm really fascinated by where, regulation is going to start playing a part in this, and, managing risk and all these things that are just really important.
So what's the client mix like? And has that changed over time? I would assume it's, assuming is dangerous, but I would assume it's, financial, regulated industries. That'd be my guess, but I don't necessarily know. That might be might be technology companies or data centers, or, I'm not sure. So tell me a little bit about what the client mix looks like.
Yeah. So the client mix typically has become, technology or software companies, right? Because leading up until kind of where we are in history, where I do think regulation is going to play a bigger part of things, most of the reason for any sort of compliance has been driven by the marketplace, and so through third-party risk management. So, we work with vendors who work with regulated industries, essentially, right? Like any kind of healthcare platform, just as an example, that does business with any sort of hospital or insurance company is going to have to be SOC 2 or high trust or something like that. That's been the bulk of the business.
Got it. So it's not the regulated companies themselves as much as it is the providers to them in a lot of ways. Right. The software providers. Okay. Yeah. Yep. So sort of one step removed.
It is. And like if you take healthcare, for instance, that's a fascinating one, because all of the big healthcare entities, sure, they do HIPAA risk assessments and they certainly build out their InfoSec programs, but they're way more strict on the companies that they do business with than even they are for themselves,
Yeah, one of the I have a buddy who's a CTO at a company called In Contracts based out of Nashville, and that was what they've built a very nice business doing, basically building out a platform to help people manage their compliance, right? It's software to manage compliance, right? So it's not, it's because it's complicated, and people, and as much of it, a whole lot of it got into vendor management, right? Because to your point, if you're a bank or a healthcare company or an insurance company, right, it's not just what you do; it's all the vendors you use have to meet the standards, right? And so how do you herd all those cats, so to speak?
Yep.
Well, let's talk a little bit. See, in looking at your resume and thinking about sort of your journey, how did you end up at 360 Advanced? It seems like a little bit of a jump from maybe what you were doing before. Not completely. You were at an MSP prior to, but tell us about that process. How you went from sort of point A to point B.
It's interesting. It was like, so I was working for a small managed services shop and a family-run business, and I just learned a ton from those guys. I'm so grateful. But I was actually in a Sandler sales training course with the guys from 360, and they they kind of recruited me. And what was interesting to me was, I think the thing that interested me most, and at the time I didn't know anything about compliance at all. I cybersecurity kind of looked and felt right. I liked the company, but what really interested me was the opportunity to build relationship and sell things and be a part of projects all over the place, and not necessarily limited to some sort of geographical area. And that has proven to be really, really valuable in terms of networking and meeting people and just having some extraordinary, experiences.
And I should have asked, how long have you been at 360 Advanced now?
3 years now. Yeah, 3 years. I'm, in July I'll hit my 3-year mark.
Gotcha. Okay. Good deal. Well, let's not to get didactic, but let's kind of start fundamentally. Tell us a little bit because we use words like compliance or other things.
Yeah.
maybe define for our listeners the GRC acronym and sort of what falls under that when if it's not something they've had to deal with, directly at their company. Because the variety of listeners, some people are going to be like knee deep in this stuff and know more about it than they ever wanted to know. And some people who are, sort of arm's length from it and maybe don't know exactly what, compliance can mean different things to different people. So maybe take just sort of the GRC acronym and sort of riff on that a bit for us.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, and I certainly haven't been around long enough to see all this happen, but just kind of looking at how I've seen things develop, it seems like GRC got kind of smushed together and sort of put to the, like here's technology, here's cybersecurity, here's, governance, risk, and compliance. We know these things are important, but where do we put them on? Let's just put them over here together. And for the longest time, I feel like, especially the cyber folks, I mean, like, GRC was something that they paid attention to, but a lot of times, especially for the compliance stuff, it was like, man, you're just really in my way. And, what is this checkbox exercise? That certainly doesn't mean we're secure. You'd hear things like that. But what I've seen in the last couple of years is GRC, governance, risk and compliance, like people in those professions and those particular disciplines, I see them start to elevate because, they are the people that understand those disciplines also understand a lot about the business holistically. And from where I'm sitting, executives are more interested than ever than, having visibility and managing their risk. And they just understand that, cyber risk is just one portion of that. So I almost feel like that's, kind of overarching. And then, the governance of it all, like having, good governance, from, policies and procedures that actually line up and that actually are being adhered to is, pretty darn important for two reasons. One, if you build a tight ship, I feel like you're just going to be a better business and you're more likely going to be, more secure. But also, with the governance piece, you're going to be able to limit your liability, because if you can show that you've built these systems and you're adhering to them, then that's really powerful when and if there's some sort of event that you have to defend yourself. And typically the way that I think about the compliance side, which has really gotten most of the attention because of what I said before, because of the third-party risk management, people needing to be compliant in order to go to market, that's typically right now anyway, in our space means that, a company, they are contracted with their client to have a SOC 2, ISO 27001, PCI certification, and so on and so forth. And I just did a LinkedIn post today, and because I've been thinking about this for a while, I made it a GRRC, and the second R, I put parentheses around, and I kind of open up a little bit about regulation. I'm certainly no lawyer, but to me, I think it's just the natural progression in a maturing marketplace, right? I mean, you'd never buy a car without a seatbelt or whatever, right? There's other, products and services that have been around for a long time. They're way more mature where, regulation has become a component of safety. And I think that's where we are, especially with AI.
Yeah. Yeah. I think AI is probably a wild card at this point in terms of what the apparatus, so to speak, how it will respond to that, right? I'm assuming that'll be a challenge for them. Which does lead me to the next question. Actually, before I do, I wanted to ask about 360 Advanced. In terms of the work you guys do, you talked about people with different skills around kind of in this sort of GRC mashup, right? But the genesis of your company came from the financial world, right? The accounting world, which accountants get it sort of a narrow. We have sort of a narrow understanding of what an accountant is, right? That's generally most people think that's somebody that does taxes, right? And sure, that's an important role for a lot of accountants out there. But there's audit and assurance. There's a consultative role. There's what we're talking about here in terms of risk and compliance. So where do you see, as you think about y'all's competitive advantage, what do you guys bring to the table? Do you have any financial people around? Is it pretty much a clear sort of technology play at this point around the compliance pieces as it relates to either the SOC 2 or the high trust or the others? I mean, are you very focused on those sort of rubrics, or are there broader or pieces in between that you guys are providing around helping people figure out how to implement this stuff and how to make it be an advantage, as opposed to what most people think of it, I think wrongfully, but think of it as just a pain in our ass, right? And money we have to spend to get cleared for takeoff, so to speak. So-and-so will buy services from us.
Yeah, that's a great question. So what 360 Advance has decided to do, and this is the wheels have been in motion and on this a lot longer than I've been around, but we've hired technical resources. I'd say probably the foundation is probably audit, and then as time has gone, we've just added more and more technical resources. And our approach as a firm has always been to compliance, kind of two things. One, take a risk-based approach. And what does that mean to us? Risk-based approach means that, yes, we are your auditor, but we're not the police, one. And two, there's no real benefit if we're just doing some sort of check the box exercise for you. Right. So we're going to try to understand your business profile and your risk profile within the framework and what's allowed, and help you hopefully to improve your business along the way while we're accomplishing these audits. And then secondly, we've kind of built a business on integrating compliance. We do really well when, let's say, a company has to do multiple frameworks, and we integrate those into one document request list, one process, so that it limits the fatigue from the technology folks so that they can focus on other things. We try to be an asset in that way. I don't know if that lands or answers your question.
It does. I do think that audit DNA is important, right? Because it was applied to financial statements or financial processes, but to your point, it's really not. It's an approach, right? More than
right.
If you abstract away from it just a bit, right? It's just as easily applied to policies and procedures or technology sort of pieces and parts as it is to sort of the financial management side of the house.
Well, and we've in the last year and a half, we've been building our own managed service. It's kind of I feel like it's easy for me to explain to people as we can be your outsourced compliance function, and we can build it in a plan where you pay monthly, and we sort of, right. We become that resource for you. It is a managed service, but sometimes that gets confused with help desk and things like that. But
sure.
I think our advantage in that space is we do have the expertise that you just described. And I think, actually, I know, is that the security folks, or like the MSSPs that do vCISO services, sure, they do understand these frameworks and compliance, but we just have a very unique perspective being the auditor. I think and having that audit or financial background that you're talking about, it's just different. And it doesn't necessarily get all the respect it deserves. And I appreciate you understanding, but I think it's just a different service than what a lot of the MSSPs and those type of companies can deliver on when it comes specifically to GRC, right?
I think that's true. Where, again, and sort of how you grow up and where your roots are have a lot to do with who you are going forward, right? And that's a good example.
Yep.
I got a little sidetracked there, so I'll swing back to where we were. We started to talk a little bit about sort of regulation and where it may be going. You mentioned AI, and obviously there's a lot of uncertainty around that, I would assume, from a regulatory perspective, because regulation almost always trails the marketplace, right? Every now and then that's not the case, but for the most part, it's true. So, from where you guys sit, as you think about sort of the compliance kind of regulatory apparatus, I don't know, if you want to talk about specific areas of that, you can. I was just going to call it kind of one thing. It's this sort of these sort of external forces that are responsible for regulating and monitoring whether companies are complying with the rules and regulations that they have to be able to operate in the markets they're in.
Yes.
Blah, blah, blah. So how is that group, as you see it and as your company sees it, how are they responding to this sort of changing landscape we're seeing. Could be zero trust. I mean, we don't even have to get into AI, because if any regulator says they've got their handle on AI, then I would run the other direction, because none of us do, right? I mean, that's got to be their answer to me. The only logical answer to that right now would be, we don't know. We're studying it. We're trying to figure that out too, right? So maybe taking a step or two back to sort of zero trust, or some of the changes that we're seeing in terms of the way people are approaching risk. The idea of one of the key points of zero trust is assume a breach. Well, I would imagine that makes a lot of regulators, when they first heard that, really freaking nervous, right? Because like, well, wait, what do you mean assuming a breach? Right?
Right.
I thought we have regulations so you don't have breach. It's like, well, no, it's not realistic. So anyway, maybe talk a little bit about that for us.
No, that's a really good point. And I think, but just to put a pin in the AI thing, I think you're exactly right. But I think I think at least people that know what they're doing are trying to get in front of it and not waiting way late. But exactly, it does trail, most certainly, and you can't keep up with it, and especially in an emerging technology like that. But I think in terms of regulation in general, I'm real interested in how how CMMC, even though that's something that is sort of kind of seemed like it's taken forever to come into fruition. But if you hear me out, like just the government creating an apparatus, like you said, right, in order to help measure risk and create assurance within the supply chain, leveraging external assessors. I mean, that's a pretty big deal. And and I think the reason it's a big deal and the reason that it's needed is because that supply chain is really, really fractured, right? And so I think that businesses, I would say the ones, not only if they're paying attention, not only ones doing business with the DoD or even the federal government, the writing on the wall to me would be, you're going to have to align with some sort of standard, and there's going to be some sort of judgment on that based on how risky your business is in order to do business. And I think, and I hope that organizations are paying attention to that. But we know that a lot of them aren't, because it's not people's nature
Yeah, for sure,
to get ahead of stuff like that.
Yeah, there's different approaches to that for sure, right? And there's the forgiveness versus permission versus maybe we can be ahead of it and be grab market share or position ourselves because of that, right? And
that's right.
Sometimes those work and sometimes they don't. It kind of depends. Depends. One thing I'm interested in, you've been in this company 3 years, and it's mostly technical people now, but it's got a little bit of a finance and accounting sort of baked in.
Yes.
What's the adjustment been like in terms of the new role and the new company relative to the way you worked before? You mentioned the nature of the MSP was a little different than, maybe similar, but maybe a little different. Talk a little bit about what that adjustment's been like.
That's a great question, and it is an adjustment that we're having to make, especially bringing on this new service line. Even for some of my colleagues that have been, in the sales side doing more traditional audit work. I think that for me, I think the difference is that we built a business on being as much of a trusted advisor as we can, but in the sort of very structured and limited way that is the auditor, right? There's only so much you can do, and it's also, in some ways, as much as we're taking a risk-based approach, it's still very prescriptive. And even the way that we, build out schedules for people and do our time and all these things, right? So it's pretty clear, and basically people know what a SOC 2 is. But when you start, helping people to build and stand up programs, it's very different, because and we are making this adjustment, but we have to get used to stepping over to that other side of the table and really building a different level of trust, right? And I think that's been a little bit of a challenge, but I think as we start to figure that out, then we can leverage the other side of the house. I think that's where we tend to be really strong. And we're pulling some people over from other companies that have this type of experience. We bought a company called Gold Sky Technologies about 6 months ago or something like that, and they were doing that type of work. So we're definitely expanding on that. But that's the role in the marketplace now. I think companies want and need to have that certain level of guidance.
Well, that leads to the next question, I think, and I think it's a good segue, which is in y'all's experience, and you're sort of looking at either prospects or current clients as well, where are companies struggling in this compliance area? And I'm going to use, again, using compliance is kind of a broader, sort of umbrella. Are companies struggling in this area due to, is it a lack of internal business skills or legal skills, or their external advisors don't really have the right fit there either? Or is it internal technology skills, or is this something totally different? I mean, where are you guys finding, where is the need getting created for somebody like you outside of the specialization around the standards themselves?
Yeah, it's another good question. I think that it's because most businesses that have, especially legacy businesses, have been going along and they've, built their business without these things for the most part. And they've been super, super reactionary. I mean, you would hope to say if you're starting a business today, just like if you were building anything from scratch, you would have a lot more understanding of how to lay this out so that you can, scale into the future. But now you're having to retrofit a lot of these things. And to your point, you're asking people that already have a ton of responsibility, right, to then take on doing this, building the airplane while it's flying. And so that, I think, creates a little bit of friction. And, you understand managed services, you understand outsourced work. I mean, not everyone's a good fit for everyone, and it's just hard. And sometimes it just doesn't work out. And if it's not a good fit or whatever, can be some friction there too. So outsourcing, I mean, I sell outsourcing, but that's not necessarily the magic bullet either. So I think we're all just working again to build as we're flying the airplane. And I think that just naturally causes, some friction when you have other deadlines, go to market stuff and all that.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So in the conversations you guys are having with clients, when it comes to making these kinds of decisions, and I'll say not buying decisions, but
yeah,
broader compliance decisions, what are they worrying about the most that you guys can gauge in terms of those conversations, and are they worrying about the right things, when they express those worries?
Well, I think that I think they're mostly worried about the friction. We just said it. So the friction that it's going to cause trying to get to where the board or the executive team wants them to get. And so that's kind of where they're scrambling, because they just want help to get from A to Z. And even on the auditor side, if they've been working with a firm that's not a good fit, that's causing a ton of extra meetings or audit fatigue and those sort of things. I mean, that just really wears on companies. So that tends to be kind of where we can help out the most.
Okay, all right. And then in those contexts, right? When you think about successful engagements, where do you see the alignment? Where do you see clients, thinking through the mind's eye of successful engagements or work
Yep.
you guys have been doing that has gone well?
Yep.
What are those companies doing differently than maybe the ones where you're struggling to be successful?
Yeah, great. So I'd say that it's kind of the old-fashioned tone at the top, right? If there's executive buy-in on the other side, and there's sort of a similar belief in quality and cooperation, then there's a certain alignment there that really you create teams that end up working together where, I mean, success is really, I won't say it's imminent, but I should say this. You're going to face challenges, but you're going to be able to work through those challenges. And typically organizations feel really good on both sides about those type of engagements. It's usually on the other side when there tends to be a lack of urgency really on that side because of a myriad of reasons that then causes some friction. And when that happens, then you start seeing a lot of blame. And when that starts happening, then that you're probably heading down the wrong path together. So I would say cultural alignment, strategy alignment, and kind of understanding sort of a kind of a co-mission approach will always lend to more successful engagements.
Yeah, I would probably describe our relationships, the successful ones and the not so successful ones, in probably exactly the same way, right?
Well,
In that sense of alignment, and tone at the top, if to use that expression, I think is a good one in this context.
Well, Bryan, I'm on the front end talking to people before they become, clients, and I can tell in early conversations when I describe our approach and we're kind of digging deep, I can almost feel a certain sort of synergy at that point that tells me if this is going to be heading in the right direction, and would make sense that most of those deals we win.
Right.
And so it's just a really, really important component of it. If it's a transactional out of the gate for type of discussion, that's just not us. You probably should go somewhere else, and we try to guide people in that direction.
Yeah, for sure. Kind of coming to the close here. As you look ahead, you've been there now 3 years, so let's take maybe the next 3 years, and kind of looking into that kind of a horizon. What excites you most as you think about this next 2 to 3 year period?
I think what excites me most is, tied back to what I said earlier. I think the continued maturation of the cybersecurity industry, but specifically, governance, risk, compliance, regulation, whatever you want to, all those things together. I think that's going to continue to be elevated, and businesses are going to be more, motivated than ever to understand, those disciplines and promote those disciplines. And I think that you're going to find leaders in security that have policy and procedure, backgrounds as opposed to engineering backgrounds. You're already seeing a lot of that. And I think that's something to really, look towards. And so to that point, it's really cool to be a part of an emerging industry and kind of being a part of helping it grow. And I really do kind of feel that way. And that's kind of cool.
Excellent. Well, on the flip side, what you think about that same time frame? What scares you? What concerns you?
What scares me, I think, is because of the rapid pace and evolution of the technology. And we talked about AI. I mean, we talked about what we've seen in our lifetimes. I mean, I think there's potential for things to move so fast, and we lose so much touch, even in terms of our humanity, that we kind of get off the rails and we let technology run our lives as opposed to the opposite. To me, I think that's probably the biggest risk, and that's why I am really invested in trying to build as many authentic relationships as I can within the industry, and trying to have open conversations about things like, mindfulness and just being authentic and real, because I think there's just a huge hunger for that. And I feel like that's in some ways all I can do as far as combating that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I always like to wrap up with something personal before I let you go. So
yeah, man.
I'd like to ask you, could you share something that you've read or watched lately that you think others ought to check out?
Something I've read or watched lately that I think, what I went to see, my wife is Jamaican, and we went to see the Bob Marley movie. I don't know if you've seen that or not.
I haven't seen it, but I've seen the trailer for it.
Man, and so I've been a fan of reggae music for a while, but I really, that movie was really powerful in the sense that it captured history really, really well. My wife felt like, we felt like, but I think that story of a small island and artists kind of coming out of that island to make so much of a difference, it really kind of speaks to me in terms of the power of creativity, and just really, struck home the whole thing. And so if you haven't seen the new Bob Marley movie, and that's something that'd be your flavor, man, I'd go check it out.
All right. Well, good deal. Well, listen, we'll stop there and let you get back to it. Carlos, thank you so much for being on Cut the Shit. We really appreciate it.
Man, I love it, Bryan. I appreciate it, bud.
Yep. Take care.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you are enjoying the podcast, we'd appreciate it if you would become a subscriber wherever you get your podcasts. And if you could rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, that would really help us out. Or you can just go old school and tell your friends, your family, your colleagues, and hell, anybody else who you think might want to hear something like this to listen in. If you're on social media, make sure to follow us on TikTok @CutTheShitPod, all one word, where we post lots of clips from the podcast. And last but not least, you can also watch the YouTube version of the show on our YouTube channel @Plow Networks. Until next time, take care and have a great day.